The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
you're now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am your host, Benjamin Dixon. It is today, Thursday, February 2nd, 2017. I'm finagling wires, this headphone wire around my head. Welcome. Thanks for being here. We couldn't do it without our patrons, as always. Special thank you to our patrons for supporting the show and making it happen. Got a couple of new patrons we want to thank at the top of the show. And before I even get started good, I want to let you guys know there's going to be a special broadcast after this show with Anoa Changa, Brandon Sutton, and the guy who stuck it to Nancy Pelosi on CNN. So I'm reminding you at the top to remind me to tell you about it at the end, so that at 10:15 you can roll over right over into their program and support them. All right, so to the patrons that are making this possible, all of you who've been here, I've had patrons who've been with me. Like there's Paul W. from, like, I believe New Hampshire. He's been with me from day 3, and he was the only patron for like a full year before anyone else came. So all of my patrons, new and old, thank you so much. Special shout out to Rebecca W. for becoming a patron, Natalie M. for becoming a patron, Matt K. for becoming a patron, and Joseph H. and Nick W. Thanks so much to all of you for becoming a patron of the Benjamin Dixon Show. All right, got this. Okay, let's get started. I'll be joined shortly to speak with Zaid Jilani of The Intercept, his article covering Sean Spicer and the looming threat of conflict with Iran based on, I don't want to use the word fake news, but misinformation is actually far more accurate. Intentional misinformation from Press Secretary Sean Spicer. So we'll talk about his article and when he joins us at around 9:15. Let's get started, right? First thing on my agenda would be Donald Trump at the prayer breakfast. So I'm not going to make a big deal out of everything he does. You know, a lot of people are talking about the fact that he got to the prayer breakfast and started talking about Arnold Schwarzenegger and his ratings and stuff. You know, that's the low hanging fruit. That's the stuff that he does. Something that came out of the prayer breakfast that is very disturbing, especially in context of everything we spoke about yesterday with the potential executive order on religious liberties. Donald Trump said, actually, I have it around here somewhere, but Donald Trump essentially said that he wants to destroy the Johnson Amendment. The Johnson Amendment is essentially what keeps religious institutions and organizations from endorsing a presidential candidate or political candidates in general. So Trump vows to totally destroy restrictions on churches' support of candidates. So let me play the clip and let you hear it for yourself. This is Donald Trump.
It was the great Thomas Jefferson who said, "The God who gave us life gave us liberty." Jefferson asked, can the liberties of a nation be secure when we have removed a conviction that these liberties are the gift of God? Among those freedoms is the right to worship according to our own beliefs. That is why I will get rid of and totally destroy the Johnson Amendment and allow our representatives of faith to speak freely and without fear of retribution. I will do that, remember.
Yeah, okay. All right, so what is the Johnson Amendment? The Johnson Amendment is a provision in the U.S. tax code that prohibits all 501c3 nonprofit organizations from endorsing or opposing political candidates. And many churches, not all churches, are religious institutions, are 501c3s, but many are, quite a few. And so it's become somewhat of a standard in American politics that churches cannot endorse. Now, the explanation or the underlying logic for it is because they receive a tax exempt status. In a way, they are subsidized by the federal government. And then if they in turn become politically active, then the federal government then is indirectly sponsoring our political speech. And so that's one of the justifications of it. And it's been observed very loosely, to say the least. Right. Many churches get around it. The religious right. I mean, the moral majority, they had voter rights campaigns, not voter rights, but voter registration drives in the 80s in the parking lot, in the what we call in church, the vestibule of churches. And they circumvented it on many ways. And then you have pastors who are able to endorse as an individual without ever implicating their churches, but you know their name and you know their name is affiliated with a church. And so it became a tacit endorsement by the church. So this last hurdle is really nothing more than giving pastors the ability to, and churches, the ability to say, we support Donald Trump. Here's the flip side of the argument. He assumes that most of these churches are going to all go for him. But I hail from the black church, the Black Liberation Theology Church, where many churches, and even those that are neoliberal prosperity gospel churches, you know, they're reliably anti-Republican Party, right? Even if they don't have a robust critique, they just kind of, they have this, knee-jerk reaction to the real racism in the Republican Party. They don't have a robust critique, but that's fine. And I say that to say, as many white churches and evangelical churches that Donald Trump feels are going, and these leaders who are going to do away with the Johnson Amendment feel they're going to come on the side of the Republican Party, you're really unleashing a horde of black churches to endorse, or more specifically, oppose somebody like Donald Trump. So I wonder if they've done a cost-benefit analysis on this, because it's very likely that they're going to be far more. I mean, there are black churches on every, not even on every corner. There are more black churches on the average corner than there are Dunkin' Donuts here in Massachusetts or Starbucks down in DC. Like that's like black churches across America. I personally think the solution is to not have the 501c3 status so that they could just not be in bed with the government and be able to do whatever the hell what they want to do anyway, separate from the government. But Donald Trump's solution is to give them the right to do away with, in his words, totally destroy restrictions on churches and give them the freedom to support candidates. I think it's opening up a can of worms, and we'll see if he actually accomplishes it and overturns this 60-year amendment that has been observed at least, 1954, at least, I believe. Caller, you're live on the air. What is your name, comment, and or question?
Hey, this is Brianna.
Hey, Brianna, how's it going?
I'm pretty good. At this point, I'm starting to think that Trump doesn't even know what he's doing.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
This is the guy that said, what was it, in the Liberty University? 2 Corinthians.
Yeah.
2 Corinthians?
2 Corinthians, yeah.
I'm starting to think all this religious freedom stuff is not even from him personally, but those
for
surrounding
sure.
him.
No,
Like
most certainly.
Mike Pence.
Most certainly. It's Mike Pence, Steve Bannon. You got it. Go ahead.
Yeah, and just one more thing, just a little bit more on the Republican Party. I think when it comes to the Republican Party, it's just that, because, we've seen the polling, and, 2018 is just around the corner, like, Trump is, like, majority disapproval rating in just in 8 days, and there's a good high chance now the Republican Party can lose a lot of power by 2018, but I really think they don't care at all.
Well, I think from their behavior patterns, it's hard to believe that they actually care. But I wouldn't put it past Steve Bannon that he has his eye on 2018 with a very laser like focus. Thanks so much for the call, Brianna. 857-600-0518. If you want to join the conversation. A little bit more on Donald Trump and his religious crusade. The article that really, I'm going to be honest with you, knocked the wind out of me yesterday, right before the show, was from The Nation, and they were discussing Donald Trump's potential executive order. We discussed it a little bit last night in a broader context of religious liberty and the threat of this type of Christianity has on America, poses to America rather. But I want to give you some details of this religious freedom order. So it was a leaked copy, and this is The Nation actually got the scoop. From The Nation, it reads, a leaked copy of a draft executive order titled Establishing a Government-Wide Initiative to Respect Religious Freedoms was obtained by The Nation. And some of the key takeaways is it extends some of its protections to one particular set of religious beliefs. It would risk violating the establishment clause of the First Amendment. In other words, one of the main things it's going to do is gives religious liberties focused on Christianity to corporations and to businesses. So it expands. And they say, quote, the executive order would appear to require agencies to provide extensive exemptions from a staggering number of federal laws without regard to whether such laws substantially burden religious exercise. And so it's a 4-page draft, and it's looking to expand the definition of a religious institution. And it wants to cover this is from the actual executive order, any organization, including closely held for-profit corporations, and protects religious freedom in every walk of life when, quote, providing social services, education, or health care, earning a living, seeking a job, or employing others, receiving government grants or contracts, or otherwise participating in the marketplace, the public square, or interfacing with federal, state, or local governments. They want to extend religious protections to everyone participating in the public square, benefiting from the public square, taking money, engaging in commerce in the public square, and they want to extend religious freedoms to them. And religious freedom is actually not the right way to say it, right? Because they have the right to worship and do whatever they want to in their personal lives, but they're trying to extend protections so that these corporations, closely held for-profit corporations, as the executive order reads, will not have to abide by anti-discrimination laws. In other words, employers will be able to discriminate against the LGBTQ community, against anything that doesn't fall within the purview of their particular religion and their particular faith. This becomes exceedingly nefarious when you consider Neil Gorsuch and his involvement in the Hobby Lobby case, in which he fell on the side of the Supreme Court's decision, in which they said that corporations are not only people, but corporations have the ability to absorb the religious beliefs of the individual owners. So now Trump is setting this up. If you combine this with the Johnson Amendment attack that he's going after, he wants to totally destroy that, combined with his choice for the Supreme Court, and combined with this draft executive order that is still in consideration, Donald Trump is really becoming the tool of the evangelical militant movement and their desire to not just coexist with people. Actually, they don't have a desire to do that at all. They have their own perverted version of Sharia law that they want to institute in the name of Jesus. And Donald Trump seems to be just headlong happy to do this for them. So This is definitely has the hand mark of Steve Bannon, Mike Pence, the evangelical church, the remaining faction of the religious right of actually, I'm sorry, the moral majority is what I wanted to say. They're still here, and they're still very active, and they're still intent on making America a theocracy, particularly on sexual morality, without any regard to any notion of economic justice or social justice that you can find in the Bible. Just forget about that portion. Let's obsess over what they determine to be sexual morality, and let's use the force of law to restrict access to public services, to people, to education. I mean, look at this list: education, anyone who is providing social services, healthcare, meaning that people will be able to turn you away from getting medical service if they don't agree with your lifestyle. And it's not just the LGBTQ community; it's anyone who doesn't abide by their religion at all. So that's really inclusive of everybody, including them. But of course, they'll never look at their own. What's that thing? They'll never look at the mote in their eye. Whatever. I'm getting rusty. All right. I'm getting ready to be joined by Zaid Jilani of The Intercept to discuss this article on Iran, Sean Spicer, and Yemen. If you haven't had a chance to read it, you should go over to The Intercept and take a look at it. And actually, he's joining me now. Zed, how are you today, man? Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Ben.
Thanks so much. I'm sure most people who follow me and follow us on Twitter, they probably know about you, but tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll jump right into the article.
Sure. So I'm a reporter at The Intercept. I've been doing this kind of work for a little bit under a decade. I've been either working in advocacy journalism or working in advocacy as an organizer for about that period of time since I was 21, where I started at Think Progress. And I also worked most recently, before coming to The Intercept, I worked for a website called Alternate, which also does sort of progressive news and views.
Awesome. Yeah. And you made it out of Think Progress, man. I'm sorry. Let me not start that. All right. Let's talk about your article, right? So Sean Spicer, and I have the clip. I want to play the clip. I actually want to start with Michael Flynn. Michael Flynn came out in a press conference yesterday, and he made some very interesting. I'm gonna be as unhyperbolic as I possibly can and let him speak for himself. This is Michael Flynn first, and then we'll be listening to Sean Spicer. Here we go.
Recent Iranian actions involving a provocative ballistic missile launch and an attack against a Saudi naval vessel conducted by Iran-supported Houthi militants underscore what should have been clear to the international community all along about Iran's destabilizing behavior across the entire Middle East. The recent ballistic missile launch is also in defiance of UN Security Council Resolution 2231, which calls upon Iran not to undertake any activity related to ballistic missiles designed to be capable of delivering nuclear weapons, including launches using such ballistic missile technology. These are just the latest of a series of incidents in the past 6 months in which Houthi forces that Iran has trained and armed have struck Emirati and Saudi vessels and threatened United States and allied vessels transiting the Red Sea. In these and other similar activities, Iran continues to threaten U.S. friends and allies in the region. The Obama administration failed to respond adequately to Tehran's malign actions, including weapons transfers, support for terrorism, and other violations of international norms. The Trump administration condemns such actions by Iran that undermine security, prosperity, and stability throughout and beyond the Middle East, and which places American lives at risk. President Trump has severely criticized the various agreements reached between Iran and the Obama administration, as well as the United Nations, as being weak and ineffective. Instead of being thankful to the United States in these agreements, Iran is now feeling emboldened. As of today, we are officially putting Iran on notice. Thank you.
So, very bellicose statement, very provocative. And the reason I wanted to play it in context is because Sean Spicer immediately came afterwards, and not only yesterday, but today as well, essentially conflating Iran with Yemen, conflating their ballistic missile with a ballistic missile that's capable of carrying a nuclear warhead, which would have been a violation of the agreement with Iran. He did a lot of conflation, which seemed to be very convenient for someone to move us in the direction of another war. Tell me about your research and what you found in your article.
Yeah, sure. So Sean Spicer actually was asked about what Michael Flynn was saying, because the Trump administration didn't really make clear what it even meant to be on notice, right? What are you going to do? Is that some sort of talk for escalating sanctions? Is it some kind of, you're going to put more ships off their coast or something like that? What are you going to do? And basically his response was to list a number of things he thought they were doing that was problematic. And it was really interesting. He said something like, oh, they had a sort of they had sort of an interdiction with or an incident with our naval vessel.
Right.
And it was really interesting because no such thing happened,
right.
under the Trump administration. There was no, the incident he was actually referring to was actually referred to by Flynn the day earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And, there were two things wrong about what Spicer said. One, it wasn't Iranians. It was a group called the Houthis who had been a part of a civil war in Yemen, and Saudi Arabia is on the other side of that. And they had targeted a Saudi ship. America and Iran both were not even part of this,
right.
in any way. And it's really interesting. Someone actually did later call and say, hey, no, it was the Saudis. And he would backtrack and say, okay, it was the Saudis. But they didn't backtrack on the Houthi Iran part, which is a really important part, too, because, making that conflation also would imply that, hey, that maybe Iran is at war with Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is our ally, so we need to be doing things. So, was it sort of done with malign intent, or is he just being sloppy? I mean, who knows? I think that unfortunately, in the United States, you can get away with saying really hyperbolic things about Iran, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. Actually, Alcee Hastings, who's a Democrat from Florida, he actually introduced a bill, his first bill of the Trump era, I guess, in January. He introduced a bill authorizing military force against Iran. It has 0 co-sponsors. No one, not even any Republicans have jumped on it. I don't know what he's doing, but unfortunately, bellicosity against Iran is a long-time tradition. And it seems like the Trump administration may be taking it on full swing.
Yeah, I've got a call out to Alcee Hastings' office. He's my former congressman, and when I looked up the bill that you're referring to as the authorization for use of force against Iran, and I saw his name there, I'm like, what in the world is Alcee Hastings doing? Turns out he actually sponsored another one in 2015. It seems to be a consistent theme for Congressman Hastings, but it's we're handing now potential authorization of use of force over to Donald Trump, who seems to want, at a minimum, increased tensions with Iran, to say the least. I want to play the clip of Sean Spicer, and I think it captures the moment that you're referring to. Let's listen in.
So I think General Flynn was really clear yesterday that Iran has violated the joint resolution, that Iran's additional hostile actions that it took against our Navy vessel are ones that we are very clear are not going to sit by and take. I think that we will have further updates for you on those additional actions, but clearly we wanted to make sure that Iran understood that they are on notice. This is not going unresponded to. John.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry. Yes. Sorry. Thank you. Sorry. Yes.
So there. All right. There he is. Right. Making that conflation, and he's corrected on something that's a major correction, right? There's a total magnitudes of order difference between the Houthi rebels firing on a Saudi vessel and Iran firing on an American vessel, but he kind of corrects it in a kind of undertone kind of way.
Right,
but
and
this is significant.
Right, and even when that reporter, who, by the way, I believe was Major Garrett, who used to be at Fox and now at CBS, even when that reporter corrected him, he still didn't correct it all the way, because the only part was the vessel part. He didn't point out that Iranians didn't even do this, right? Actually, when you're talking about the Houthi rebels, there are some connections, especially since Saudi Arabia intervened. Iran wanted to ramp up what it was doing there. It's kind of almost a natural rivalry and reaction. But the reality is that it's been reported, for example, that the Houthi rebels, when they took over the government in Yemen, that Iran actually told them not to do that. They didn't think it was a good idea. Right. So it's not like, Iran says, jump, and they say how high. I mean, they're a distinct group that at times has actually been allied to Saudi Arabia as well. So it's a really, really problematic assertion to make. And someone who's a spokesperson for basically for our country when they're saying things like that, because Trump hasn't said anything about this, and the State Department doesn't even have a spokesperson right now. So really, it's on Sean Spicer, and he can't afford to be that sloppy just to try to make a belligerent case about Iran. And by the way, both Spicer and Flynn are talking about Iran. Oh, Iran's doing this, Iran's doing that. Let's just remember, last week we issued a total ban on Iranians coming to the United States, right? It's not like we didn't provoke them at all, right? Like that was a really like an action that Obama and Bush didn't do, or Clinton didn't do. This was, a major provocation, and they're just pretending that didn't even happen. So the story they're telling is far from complete, and it does set up a mindset which I think Michael Flynn at least seems to have of seeing, hey, Iranian action everywhere. They're behind everything in the Middle East, and we have to, do more against them in the Middle East, because otherwise, who knows what will happen. But the reality is that these are supposed to be careful diplomatic situations, and when you say these things and when you do things like what they did last week, it could make things a lot worse, and it could turn a situation where really Iran and the United States do have shared interests, and there are things they should be working together with. And the last administration towards the end started doing some of that. Like, we could end up ruining a lot of that by doing this stuff. Forget whether we actually go all the way to like having a military conflict with them, or God forbid we would do. But there's so many things short of that which we could just ruin in sort of a difficult situation. And I think the Trump administration, I talked to PJ Crowley today, who was Clinton's State Department person. And I asked him his thoughts about this, and he was saying something like, well, maybe, over time they'll mature and things like that. And maybe that's the case. Maybe they haven't even held like a principals meeting of their National Security Council. They haven't assigned a lot of the seats for people who deal with these things. But in the meantime, they shouldn't be out here making all those bellicose statements, right? They should, if they have to get their stuff together, they should get their stuff together before they're out here, especially when they're saying things that are completely wrong at the press briefing.
Exactly. So there's an article that I was reading by Tim Johnson and Anita Kumar, and they were addressing the substance of Iran's actions in testing the ballistic missile, which they did, which, the Trump administration is saying it's a clear violation. Iran is saying it's not. So I guess this is something they're trying to make it a wash. But in this article, they said that Iran is really testing how far they can go with the Trump administration. And they feel that maybe Michael Flynn specifically is trying to draw the line, not a red line, but draw a line in the sand to show Iran where this administration stands. What's your take on that? What signal do you feel, if any, is Iran trying to send? And then do you feel like this bellicose statement from Michael Flynn, basically from Donald Trump, is sending a signal back? Or do you feel like they have aggressive intentions like we've seen in times past?
I think it's really difficult to say at this point. I think a lot of people around the world, probably in Iran as well, did not expect Donald Trump to win and to be victorious. And I think because of that, a lot of them are having to recalibrate sort of their relationship and sort of see, how different will Trump be from the previous administration. So I think it's really difficult to say what their intent and their glancing at Trump is. I do know that they announced right after the executive order from Trump that they wouldn't reciprocate, so that any American who has an active Iranian visa, they're not going to be blocked or banned or anything. So I think there is that. But I think something people need to understand is sometimes the United States refers to Iran as like it's a total dictatorship. It's like, oh, just the Ayatollah just does whatever he wants or whatever. But that's not true. The fact of the matter is Iran is just like any other. It's like many other countries in that it has internal politics. There are more moderate factions of people in Iran. There's more hardline factions of people in Iran. And I think right now the moderates who won the last election, people like Rouhani, who's the president, Zarif, who's the foreign minister, I think they're probably looking at a way of saying, how can we hold on to power in this environment, Because the hardliners are going to say, look, the Americans brought this guy Trump in. He's saying all this stuff. He just I can't go see my cousin in New York. You're obviously, your worldview is wrong. Obviously, we have to be stronger and we have to show our our teeth and that kind of thing. So I think it's a kind of a precarious situation for them. So far, I think they're trying to straddle a line where they can say, we're not going to go full hardline and scare off America and Europe and everyone, but also we have to show that we're not just going to be pushed around. And that is what you really would hope that the Trump administration understands. They would understand that these things can often be a tense diplomatic situation, and that when you go macho and when you decide that you're going to be this way, that they're going to have their internal politics, which is going to tell them that they have to respond the same way, right? Otherwise, they're not going to keep their power, because right now, the moderate faction in Iran has an incentive to stick around. And if people feel like they're weak, this Trump guy, he's really bad, he's really antagonistic to us, and you're not saying anything or you're not doing anything, then and that, I think, is the scary part. And that's what these people should be concerned about. And that's what really makes someone like Michael Flynn, who I think tends to have a very antagonistic worldview, not a very diplomatic worldview, sort of dangerous in this administration, versus somebody like, I think, Jim Mattis or maybe even Rex Tillerson, who may have a more diplomatic worldview, who may not necessarily see this as the way to go. And maybe now that those two people are in place, they can assert themselves against the White House a little bit and try to push back. But, who knows?
Who knows? That's the question. Zaid, thanks so much for joining me. His article over at The Intercept is Press Secretary Sean Spicer falsely accuses Iran of attacking U.S. Navy vessel, an act of war. You wrote it along with Alex Emmons. Thanks so much for joining me, man.
It was great, Ben.
Awesome. 857-600-0518 if you want to join the conversation. We've got a lot more to cover before the end of the show. But I'll be doing another conversation on the authorization for use of force against Iran that's sponsored by a Democrat. Surprisingly enough, that's what Zaid from The Intercept, that's what he just mentioned. And so it's really in this environment where we have these attempts to show, I don't know if hubris is the word that I'm looking for, but the bellicose language, the ability to take us to war. We already have the legislation in the docket for Donald Trump to be able to do that, and it's being brought to us by a Democrat of all people, which I guess shouldn't be a surprise. 857-600-0518. Caller, you're live on the air. What's your name, comment, and/or question?
Hey, Ben, it's Nick from Oregon.
Nick, how's it going, man? What's on your mind?
Hey, so good. I'm a little bit calmed down from yesterday,
Yeah.
So I'm just going to start out real quick. I don't know if you saw this yet. I don't know if you had time to put it in your notes or anything, but apparently Sarah Silverman, our greatest spokesperson, is calling out for an all-out military coup against Donald Trump. Good time.
like for real. This is why. Hang on one second.
I want a part of that.
Hold on 1 second. This is why we can't allow celebrities to talk. Like, not all the time. Like, celebrities, before you want to speak on an issue, just go get some basic education, enough to know that a military coup is the absolute worst scenario that we could possibly take in the United States. But go ahead, man.
Seriously, I want whatever she's drinking. But regardless, my question tonight is, so we've got a lot of military focus, tension, just a lot of it is rising up. And I think someone in Project Sanity, but maybe someone else, was talking about, like, we are definitely going to Iran. What do you think? I mean, what do you think would be even a timeline for us doing anything military? Like, what are we about to see? I'm just curious of your opinion.
I mean, that's I don't want to predict, because if we take history into the calculus, right? We have seen throughout American history, recent and distant history, our ability to create wars and to use unclear events that are not clear, and use that as a means to get us into war. Donald Trump seems to be intent on some type of conflict, whether it be just the increased tensions, increased sanctions, or an actual all-out conflict. He seems to want this with Iran. We'll see tomorrow. They're discussing putting unilateral sanctions more on Iran, and discussing tearing up the nuclear agreement we have with Iran, which creates the perfect storm for us to go to war. If he does all of the insane things that he's talking about, we could be in a conflict with Iran before April, for May, if he really is as extreme as he's signaling. But there's a difference between what you signal and what you actually carry out. The problem with that is what the Zaid just said, though. Even signaling this type of this type of willingness to go to war or have a conflict can itself have unintended consequences. So if Trump is just simply trying to say, Iran, I'm a bad man, watch out for me, if he's just trying to let his presence be known on the international stage, that in itself could inadvertently take us to a conflict with Iran.
Totally.
So
And I
yeah,
actually
go
have
ahead.
one more question,
Yeah,
or
go for
one
it.
more related thing to it, and not just Iran, if that was okay.
Yeah, no, go for it.
Yeah, so I mentioned Iran just because obviously that's what we were just talking about, but also, I mean, Steve Bannon has made has made it not unclear that China, or I think what I saw specifically was he said like South China Sea, was that, I mean, he wants to, apart from Trump, would like to also do something with China and engage on that front. And then you take into account that Trump also threatened Mexico with, hey, if you don't take care of your stuff, we're going to come in there and deal with it for you. So, I mean, like, not necessarily a prediction per se, but just like, do you think that he's just strong manning, and that we're just going to be, hey, we're just here and we're all power, or do you think that we're moving in somewhere quickly?
Again,
And that'll be my question.
Thanks, man. Thanks for the call. Again, it's hard to say. I would say that if he carries out all of the things that he's signaling, then I mean, it all adds up to an actual conflict, a hot war with Iran. If he does everything that he's signaling, I don't know whether to put any stock on him doing anything else but what he signaled, right? But he has surprised us. Today we have two surprises that I want to talk about, both of them. A surprise with regard to Russia and Ukraine, and a surprise with regard to Israel and the settlements. So he has backed away from two huge components of his campaign. And we'll discuss the reasons why, or we're trying to figure out what the hell is going on in his mind. So it's possible that he will not be as insane as he's signaling that he wants to be aggressive towards Iran. But it's a wait and see kind of game. All right. 857-600-0518. You guys know the number by heart. I think everyone should be able to say it by now at this point. We'll take the next caller, but before we do, I do want to jump into what the last caller brought up, particularly with Ukraine. Surprisingly enough, and against what I think most people expected, UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, she today hit Russia hard. I mean, I don't think anyone saw this coming, and we're trying to put into context of why. But she, in her very first appearance before the UN, she was there to discuss the violence emerging in eastern Ukraine. She said this, quote, "The United States continues to condemn and call for an immediate end to the Russian occupation of Crimea. Crimea is a part of Ukraine. Our Crimea-related sanctions will remain in place until Russia returns control over the peninsula to Ukraine." So this is a complete 180 from the message and the signals that Donald Trump was, transmitting in his campaign. Thinking about the reasons why, it really, I'm thinking Michael Flynn. I'm thinking Mattis. I'm thinking people who have been establishment players in the Pentagon, or to some extent in the Pentagon, are on Donald Trump's tail with regard to Russia. There are plenty of Republicans who completely oppose Donald Trump's worldview with regard to Russia. I don't know what type of leverage any of them, like John McCain, I don't know if he has any type of relationship or leverage with Donald Trump at this point, which is why my guess and my suspicion would be Michael Flynn and Jim Mattis. But Nikki Haley, in her presentation, she continued and she said, quote, "I consider it unfortunate that the occasion of my first appearance here is one in which I must condemn the aggressive actions of Russia. We do want to better our relations with Russia. However, the dire situation in eastern Ukraine is one that demands clear and strong condemnation of Russian actions. This escalation of violence must stop." So, with regard to Russia, it seems like despite what Donald Trump said during his campaign, despite everything, the expectations that we had, it seems like he's going with the Obama administration line. So, I mean, just an example of some of the things they said at a January 31st statement from the State Department condemned the recent violence. You know, I mean, to counter what he said on the campaign trail. A January 31st statement condemned the violence, but it didn't mention Russia, nor did it contain the statement of support of Ukraine that we normally have had from the Obama administration. So in one step, he tries to change the dynamics by not directly implicating Russia and not expressing support for Ukraine, which is a significant thing, right? That's not a little thing in international affairs and foreign policy, right? It's as significant as him not mentioning the Jews in his Holocaust remembrance statement. The words of the president, every word that is omitted has and carries significance. And so on the 31st, he's signaling, he sends out this statement to condemn the violence, but omits implicating Russia and doesn't show or express support for Ukraine. So that was right on track with his campaign. And then a few days later, Nikki Haley comes out with a full-throated condemnation of Russia and the letting us know that the sanctions will remain despite the expectation that the sanctions would be lifted and showing full-throated support for Ukraine. Unpredictable, yeah. You know, a very, very much, very unpredictable Donald Trump. So I would be interested to see how Russia responds to a Donald Trump who is consistent with President Obama on Ukraine with Nikki Haley's statement, right? So we'll see what Donald Trump says tomorrow. Tomorrow it could all be totally different. But at least with Nikki Haley's statement at the UN, it seems to be consistent with the Obama administration. Caller, you're live on the air. What is your name, comment, and or question?
It's me, Scotty.
What's up, man? What's on your mind?
I don't know if you saw this story in the Hill about Adam Schiff warning that the Democratic base is getting radicalized and it could really hamper some things for him if he has to run in a couple of years. So he's saying we need to get this energy harnessed into basically voting for Democrats. Mm-hmm. So it made me think about your video where you said it's time to break up with them. Yeah. And it's like, that's been time. Like, and I'm hearing you say in the past couple of days, like, they're not up for this fight.
They need to get out of the way.
Want it, and that's because anybody who would fight, like, they want fight, but they only fight with progressives. Like, look at what happened in Dennis Kucinich. Look at what they did to Alan Grayson.
Yep.
Like, they apparently he was leading in the polls, and all of a sudden, Harry Reid, Barack Obama, all the establishment players decided that they wanted to make sure that
Patrick Murphy,
Grayson doesn't. Yeah, Patrick Murphy. Thanks. Like they wanted to endorse Patrick Murphy as a behest of Alan Grayson.
Right.
So. Like,
who ended up losing to Marco Rubio, who ended up losing to Marco Rubio anyway. So they undermined not only the progressive position, but they undermined the Democratic position, right? And so, yeah, it backfired on them.
Yeah, well, they didn't care about that. Like, you can even go back to, I think his name was Bill Alter, if you remember him, for Louisiana, the Senate seat, and he was going against Blanche Lincoln.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's a story that was done about Barack Obama doing robocalls to vote for Blanche Lincoln in black districts, and that pushed her over the edge. And they asked her why, what made you vote for Blanche Lincoln? They said Obama asked me to vote for her. I mean, these guys, they're not interested in, quote unquote, fighting with the Republicans. They're just there to make deals. That's really all they're there to do.
Yeah, you've unpacked a lot, and actually, I do want to. I mean, since you brought it up, I do want to talk about. Thanks for the call, man. I want to talk about Adam Schiff's comments, because to me, it represents it's the best example of as much as we need to unify against Donald Trump. I'm going to give that caveat up top. Like, the stuff that Donald Trump is doing is insane. I would say he's down to 8 out of 10 things that he's doing is insane, right? What he's done with Ukraine is consistent. What he's recommending with the occupation of Palestine, the settlements, it seems to be pretty consistent, surprisingly so. And such a surprise, I don't know quite what the hell to do with that yet. I got to process it and see what he's really up to. But still, 8 out of 10 things, just 20% that you're scoring correct on, right? That's still an F. So we need to unify against the onslaught coming from Donald Trump. However, what are we unifying with? Like Adam Schiff, he said, quote, "The radical nature of this government is radicalizing Democrats." And this is in the Los Angeles Times. And that's going to pose a real challenge to the Democratic Party, which is to draw on the energy and the activism and the passion that is out there, but not let it turn us into what we despise about the Tea Party. Well, surprise, surprise, Congressman Schiff, out of, I don't know, is it congressman or senator, whatever. Representative Schiff. The problem is that you're afraid of us becoming radicalized when you're dealing with people who are more radicalized than you can handle. Right. People like Schiff and the senator from West Virginia, his name escapes me right now. We discussed him yesterday. They don't want to engage in this fight with the radical elements of the Republican Party. They are perfectly geared up to fight against the progressive movement within the Democratic Party. And it's not just them, right? This is a problem of the Democratic Party in general. They have mastered, over the last 30 years, they've mastered the art of fighting against Democrats, but they have let an onslaught of Republicans on a state and federal level. I mean, Republicans are running America. The state houses, the state Senate, the governor's seat, the House of Representatives, the U.S. Senate, the White House, and soon to be the Supreme Court. And that's because Democrats have mastered the art of fighting against progressives and not the art of fighting against conservatism. And it's one of two things. Either they are incompetent and inept and incapable of, forgive the alliteration, of fighting against Democrats, or they absolutely agree with the Republicans, rather. I meant to say Republicans. So either they like what they're doing or they're inept. Either way, Donald Trump signals something different than even the worst of what we've experienced. And you have people who are not ready to lead the fight against them, and not only not lead, but they're undermining the fight. And as much as I know we have to unify, what are we unifying with? It can't be with people who are going to constantly undermine our best efforts of stopping Donald Trump when he's expressed, particularly on social issues, that he wants to take us back to the 1800s. And yet we have some Democrats who are afraid of us becoming radicalized and want us to work with Donald Trump. And I want to read this last quote from the LA Times. He said, and this is Schiff, he said, "We are obviously having that debate, but there's a whole new element, which is the reaction to the Trump administration that makes this different, certainly different in intensity than I think we've ever seen in an election. The more radical the administration, the more radicalized our base becomes." So no, you don't give Donald Trump credit for the radical elements of the left. We've been here. And we're just loud now. We're just louder than we've ever been before. What radicalized us is the fact that the Democratic Party left the left, abandoned the left, and moved towards the right for the last 30 years. And now that we know what happened, we saw what happened, we saw the causes of it, that radicalized us, not Donald Trump. And you should be thanking us because we are uniquely equipped to not only take on Donald Trump, but to beat Donald Trump. And the question is, do they really want that? Or are they just, particularly Schiff and his ilk, are they silently okay with some of the things that Donald Trump is doing? That's a question that they need to answer, and they will answer by their actions. Like, they don't have to expressly say it to us. We're going to look at their votes. We're going to look at what they oppose. And if they don't oppose Trump at every stop, then we know what side they're on. All right, let's take this last caller. Caller, you're live on the air. What is your name, comment, and or question?
Hey, Ben, it's me, Jared, from down in town, PA.
Jared, how's it going, man?
Nice to talk to you again.
What's on your mind?
Pretty good. My predictions always seem to come true. I'm always seem to be right when it comes to foreign policy. You remember when I said Trump could potentially bring us into a conflict with Russia?
Yeah,
and you thought I was crazy when I said that at the time?
Did I say you were crazy?
It was like in October.
I don't know if I said you're crazy, but
like I sounded like I crazy.
All right, go ahead. It's possible.
You were kind of.
Go ahead.
You were kind of shocked by it that it would bring us into conflict, but I think you know of the concept of deep state.
Yep. We were just talking about that before the show.
This is.
Go ahead.
We are. This is deep state on steroids. Trump is 100% being kowtowed into doing all this stuff, which is why we're seeing the same neocon agenda playing itself out. Trump isn't actually running the government. It's a whole cabal of the lunatic neocons he's got there running everything. Frank Gaffney, Michael Flynn, Pence, Bannon, all the rest of the lunatics. And I see potentially there's probably going to be a war with Iran. I think we're going to see an escalation with conflict with Russia on the border. We're going to see more missiles being brought over near Poland and the Baltic states.
Right.
I also see a conflict with China as well. It's and I don't see an actual military conflict per se. I see more of cyber warfare conflict with China. But I do believe we are going to invade and occupy Iran, which is going to be
disastrous,
unbelievably bloody, and we're it's going to be like a Holocaust. Yeah, but and I also think the settlements in Israel are going to continue and only expand. And I don't think this would have changed if Hillary would have been president, though. That's the sad part. This foreign policy is just the one issue where it really doesn't matter who's president. It's all pretty much the CIA running everything for the most part. What do
Jared,
you think?
One, thanks for the call. I'll give you the answer. We're sitting back thinking. We were thinking before the show, right? So you call it the deep state. Some people call it the shadow government. I call it the institutions and the bureaucracy. I think we kind of disregard the amount of power the Pentagon has. Just period. Like the stuff that happens at the Pentagon, and our Defense Department, and the contractors, the bureaucracy, the bureaucrats, their strategies, their plans, their worldview. You know, most of the things that come to a president's desk are prepared hundreds of hours, probably thousands of hours of work for some bureaucrats, / professional, military personnel, officers, high-ranking officers who have their worldview, who view the world through the lens of conflict, because that's what they're trained, that's what they know, and they make these options. They give and present these options to the president that are pre-selected. right? You have options A through B and C, A, B, and C. These are your choices. And those choices represent thousands of hours of work from, and not only just their work, but their ideology and their worldview. That is a powerful thing. And this is why we see the very next day, if not the same night, drone strikes continued. Just switch. They flipped the switch from Obama to Trump. But the same type of foreign policy continued. And I think we put a lot of emphasis on the president, but realistically, one of my things has always been what president is actually strong enough to fight back against the machine that America is. Like, there's the economic machine, but then there's also the military machine. And I think the people pulling the strings on Russia, I think 100% from the Pentagon. You know, call it the deep state, call it the shadow government, call it wherever you want. To me, it's just the people at the Pentagon. People at the Pentagon who've been, some of them been fighting Russia, on paper or, covertly for years. And there is an overriding doctrine and relationship that the Pentagon has towards Russia that isn't just going to disappear because we have a president who wants to be friends with Russia. Now, I'm sure there are plenty of other factors and variables in this calculus, right? But we're talking about, like, what is the driving force that keeps things consistently happening no matter which administration. And I think we just kind of overlook the Pentagon as a city, a city of officials, of officers, of staffers who put thousands of hours of work into one brief, into a single brief, into a one-page document. And of course, that one-page document, that one-page executive brief that took thousands of man hours to put together represents a consistent ideology that transcends any administration. So the real question is why does the Pentagon actually? Nah, I'm going to stop that question right there. I'm going to formulate it better, and I'll bring it back to you tomorrow. All right. Last story of the night. And thanks. So before I do it right now, let me before I do the story, you guys, I want you to tune in, stay tuned in. 10:15. We're going to have an interview on our channel with Anoa Changa, Brandon Sutton, and the gentleman who basically, I don't want to, the incident with Nancy Pelosi, where you have to see the video if you haven't. It was a beautiful video. Be sure to tune in. They're interviewing the young man. I'm trying to find his name. I don't know his name off the top of my head. What is this guy's name? I want to find it because it's going to be a great interview. They scooped me on my own channel. It was hilarious. I was going to do that interview, but I took too long. Oh, here we go. On Twitter, he is known as Spawn of Gluten, and his name is Trevor Hill. It came to me. Why did it come to me as soon as I clicked on before I saw his name? It came to me. Anyway, stay tuned for an interview with Trevor Hill. They'll have the footage and everything else. Last story. Actually, nah. Good night, folks. See you tomorrow.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. It's Ben Dixon! If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.
And if you are a patron, tomorrow's bonus show, be sure to tune in. If you want to become a patron so that you can get the full hour or as close to an hour as I can get, Friday's show, go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show. You guys have a great night.